Just to think there was sheep grazing here about a fortnight ago. Anyway, Ben Calder is our next guest, and you may have already seen Ben around the back here in the workshop area, together with colleagues from Shrewsbury's Centre of Integral Health. Now, he's been involved in the holistic health movement for more than 25 years. You don't look old enough, you don't look old enough.
Started small.
And he'll be talking to you today about allergies, kinesiology, which I probably haven't pronounced correctly, and epigenetics. And I'm really very pleased that he's going to be explaining what all of that means. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ben Calder.
Avid supporters in the crowd there, thank you very much. So I've got quite a lot to get through in the next kind of 30-40 minutes. This kind of topic I can easily talk for a day or two on, so I'm going to try and get as much information across as possible. But I just want a quick show of hands first of all. Is anybody cold today? Feeling cold? Okay. Would any of you like a little bit of help warming up while I lecture? Yeah? Would you be in for that? If you want to warm up, I mean, I can see you've got some hot food going on there, some hot drinks, but if you want to warm up, you can actually just stand up while we're doing this, and we're going to do a little bit of just like bouncing around. You're going to get your circulation moving, get your energy going, get your lymph flowing, and there's a very good reason why I suggest that you bounce while we do this, and that's because as an integral practitioner, part of what I do is I look at all the different ways in that your health can be affected, and part of that is the way that your physical body works, and we're going to talk about the allergy side of that in a moment. But if we are sluggish, if our circulation is poor, if our lymph is poor, we get an increasing build-up of endogenous toxin. That is toxin that our body creates for itself. So every metabolic pathway inside your body will create a waste product. And if you're too docile, if you don't spend enough time moving around, then that stuff doesn't get to move as easily. And the more it backs up, the more your body's trying to process. And that actually makes the external toxins, the exogenous waste, it makes it more difficult for your body to process. So you're more likely to have a problem with something outside, whether it be a metal or a chemical or something else, if your own metabolic processes don't work properly. So just by doing a little bit of shaking every day and shaking yourself out and building the kind of movement in your system, you actually get to help improve your own tolerance on a different level. I just kind of thought I'd throw that in there for you. So if you get cold during the talk, please do just stand up and bounce. You'll honestly feel better. As you know, my name's Ben Calder. I run a clinic in the centre of town called the Centre for Integral Health. I've been working as a professional kinesiologist for the last 16 years. And 20 years ago this year, I was at an event not dissimilar to this one, and there was somebody doing a talk called Hacking Your Body's Computer, which was all about how we could use kinesiology for getting information from the body, and specifically around allergies. Now, at the time, I had really bad allergic rhinitis, which for those of you that don't know is perennial hay fever, which means that you sneeze all year round. And I was having bouts of sneezing where there would be kind of 10 or more sneezes in a row, probably a dozen times a day, every day of the year, all of the time. It was quite horrible. I could take steroid inhalers and that would sort the problem out, but there's long-term problems with those for people, not least of which in males is sterility. So having been put on those at 11 years old, and it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I found out the problems they could cause. There's probably a good reason why I'm not a father so far. But what I found from going to that talk was that I went to see the lady afterwards and said, I have these issues. I also had psoriasis at the time, which is kind of like an excessive skin growth within the body. And I went up to this lady and said, I've got these problems. Do you think you could help me? And she said, sit down and let's find out. So we did some kinesiology testing right there and then, and I went and had sessions for about another 9 months, and it improved things on me so much that I ended up going and training as a kinesiologist, and now 16 years later I'm stood here telling you how I got here. So that's not a bad thing to start with. So we're going to talk a little bit about allergies and epigenetics today. Epigenetics is that which governs your genetics, that which triggers them. So back in the 90s, when the Human Genome Project was taking place, we had this belief in genetic determinism. If we could map what your genes are, we could tell you what was going to happen. And by the end of the 90s, when they found out that we didn't have that many more base pairs than fruit flies and cabbages, they realised actually that it's about what informs the genetics that makes the difference. And that is about what you do every day. So depending on what goes into your system will depend on what your genetics decide to do. What you feel, how you emote, what you believe will also change the chemical cascades through your cells and tell your genetics what to do. So if you're not aware of that already, you now are, so you can start to make better choices to how to express a healthy, happy, lively body. And you can make choices to help all of that. Now, the term allergy was actually coined in 1906 by a paediatrician called Baron Clemens von Piquet, and comes from the Greek words allos, which means altered or changed, and ergon, which means reaction. So an allergy is really about an altered reaction. And in kinesiology, we talk about it being an altered energy reaction at a tissue level. And this can occur anywhere in the body, and it can occur in response to any substance. Now, from a medical point of view, allergy is only that which triggers an immunoglobulin response in your blood, and that is based on the substance having a protein in it. So technically, from a medical point of view, if there's no protein present, you won't get an immunoglobulin response, and therefore it's not an allergy. And it's sometimes then referred to as a low tolerance or a hypersensitivity. But from a kinesiology point of view, if any amount of that substance creates that reaction, it's an allergy, because any amount of the substance creates a reaction. It's altering the profile within the tissues itself. A low tolerance is slightly different. It's based on the volume. So it's okay for you to have a little bit of the substance, and it's okay for you to have it every now and again. But have too much, have it too often, or have it when you're stressed or run down or ill, and it will exceed your body's capacity to metabolize it at that point in time, and you'll have a reaction, which outwardly is the same as an allergy or similar to an allergy, but the reason why it started is different. And we have a tolerance to everything. People, places, colours, patterns, foods, the weather, all sorts of stuff. Everybody's got a friend somewhere that if they spend longer than an hour with them, that's enough. And on a good day, you might get 2 or 3 hours with them. On a bad day, you don't even want to bump into them in the street. You know, you're making sure that you don't see them. That is your tolerance. It varies. And from a kinesiology and a traditional Chinese medicine point of view, that will change about every 2 hours. So as your meridian system, which is the same system as an acupuncturist is using, is going through its cycles during the day, what's known as a horary cycle, there are some of those pathways that are in a healthier, stronger state, and there are some of those pathways that are not. So you can be like this just during the day. You'll have seen it in your day. You can be great in the morning, rubbish in the evening, or you can be rubbish in the morning, feel great in the evening. And that's your system changing, and based on what you put in or don't put in during that day, and that's both physically in terms of food, also in terms of movement, also in terms of relationships, also in terms of what it gets affected by in the environment, that can change all of that stuff for you in just that short period of time. And we know that an allergy can react within seconds. We've all seen anaphylaxis, we all understand that, but it can actually take up to 72 hours for your body to show that response. And that depends on where in your body the problem is happening and how long it takes the body to metabolize that substance to that point. Now with allergy, because it's an altered reaction and your body doesn't recognize the thing, it's going to put it into an incorrect metabolism pathway. So it could do all sorts of things. Sometimes it stores things that it should be using or getting rid of. So this is where we can have weight gain or weight that doesn't shift for us. It can be getting rid of things that it should be storing or using. And also it can treat things like an invading pathogen. So we get our inflammatory responses, our sneezings, our irritations, and so on. So just some interesting figures about allergy as well. So in the UK, it's estimated, and this is figures from 2010, that 44% of UK adults have at least one allergy. We also know that between 2008 and 2009, those figures increased by 2 million individuals, and that's 10 years ago. So what is it like for us now? Between 1992 and 2012, there was a 615% increase in admissions for anaphylaxis within hospitals. So allergy is going up massively. Now, if we take some figures from over the other side of the water, because we've got some more recent ones of these from 2018, more than 50 million Americans have experienced various types of allergies each year. And the allergies are the 6th leading cause of chronic illness in the US. So that's pretty high. You know, it's not that they're kind of low down. We also have as well food allergies costing somewhere in the region of about 18 billion a year. And food allergies, for all sorts of reasons, cost about 25 billion a year. And as well in the EU, the avoidable indirect costs of properly treating allergy estimate to range between about 55 and 151 billion euros per year. Wow. Does that surprise anybody? I mean, you've all come along to kind of like a free-from allergy-ish kind of thing, so I'd hope that all of you have got a bit of an idea that allergies are pretty bad. Now, in the UK as well, allergic disease across all ages costs the NHS an approximate 900 million a year, mostly through prescribed treatments in primary care, and can represent up to 10% of a GP's prescribing budget, okay, just on allergies. And most of that is avoidable. You know, it really is. You can limit that. So what is it that's made allergy more prevalent? Why is it getting worse? So part of it is actually to do with genetic predisposition. And the thing about genetic predisposition is it's changing every generation, because what's happening in our environment is informing the body, and that changes the DNA. So everything you're exposed to before you have children can change your DNA and could potentially end up in their DNA. And so that's changing over and over. Now we know from research that's just been published this year with flatworms, these are nice little creatures, that some of those epigenetic factors will exist for as many as 14 generations. So you can trigger a particular trait in flatworms and you can map it through successive generations, but if you don't trigger the response, after 14 generations it actually starts to breed out. But if that gets triggered at any point within those 14 generations, it just reinforces it. And the same is happening for us as well. So our genetics are a basis for it. And of course our genetics are informed by what we feed ourselves in a rather large way. Now, if we take a car analogy as a nice easy way to think about it, if I gave you a very expensive car, very expensive, and I want you to just imagine your kind of dream expensive car for a moment there, think about how pristine and lovely it would be and how you'd just love to drive it. Now, if you got given that, but were told at the same time you could never have another vehicle in your life, and in fact you would not be able to travel anywhere on this planet without that vehicle, would you take care of it? Really? Are you sure? You don't sound that enthusiastic about caring for your expensive, pristine car. But you would be. You'd look after it. Would you put good quality parts in it? Would you pay for the best parts? Would you service it regularly? Would you make sure... See, that's a really good point. You know, and I like it as a point. I don't think you would. I'm going to disagree with you, because if you never had another way of being able to travel around in your life, you would put every effort into making sure that you could use that rather than risk the cheap import. Honestly, please don't risk the cheap imports. So you'd look after it, you'd service it. Would you teach yourself to be a better driver as well, so you were less likely to crash, ding, wreck, flatten? Okay, good. So the thing that you haven't cottoned onto yet is that you are the really expensive car. You are the really expensive, irreplaceable car. So how many of you are spending £300, £400, £500, £600 a year servicing and fueling and looking after your cars? How many of you directly spend at least that much money looking after yourselves? Now, the car we can replace, you we cannot. So as a really expensive car, you need to invest in yourself to look after yourself. And this is where your genetics are important as well. Because if you're going to put rubbish stuff in, you're going to turn that pristine vehicle into something that's just wrecked. Now, other things that have increased or can increase the likelihood of allergic reactions are things like severe viral infections, because these can create damage within our immune system and create changes in the way we respond. Parasite infections, especially where they've been genetically affecting your forebearers. You know, if you were in strong farming communities and you spent a lot of time dealing with parasites in your environment, then that actually increases the production of immunoglobulin G in your system, and that is likely to be carried through genetically, and you can end up with a bit of a trigger-happy immune system. So that means that you're more likely to respond to things because of your ancestors' lifestyles. So some of this is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Some of it you need to become aware of so that you can deal with it. We also have excessive cleanliness these days. So we spend more time using incredibly strong cleaning agents, and that has two effects. A, there's a lot of chemicals in there, and those chemicals can have an adverse effect on your system, and B, what's happening is your immune system isn't getting adequately primed because it's not getting a chance to be exposed to stuff. So those of you who are here with children, please at some point during the day grab them by the scruff of the neck and drag them through that hay swimming pool that's over there. Make sure that you trip them over into the mud, get them to get some dirt into their systems, because this will help to prime their systems, let them get dirty. Now, one of the things that I do on a regular basis is that I buy organic fruit and vegetables from Riverford Organic, and most of it comes to me dirty. I don't peel it, I just scrub it so that I'm ingesting micro amounts of soil within my diet, something called geophagy. And what this does is at a low level, it helps to stimulate my gut and the bacteria that's in there to be stronger. So it's something that we can do there. So we know that if young people are not exposed to enough dirt, that the immune system, again, doesn't develop as well as it could. We also know that vaccinations can have an effect on the body, partly because of some of the ingredients, and again, partly because of the method of delivery is not natural. So we inject all of these things into the body, and that is rarely how the body would come into contact with it. So it can create priming in the immune system that's not quite correct there. Now, one of the biggest issues that we have is that we have the continuous presence of foods these days. So our supermarkets, in their wisdom to serve their markets, have managed to find a way to make sure that you can have strawberries at Christmas. Okay, really unnatural. You can get hold of the same foods all year round, and because we like what we like and it makes us feel good, we have a habit to eat the same foods over and over and over again. So rather than actually varying the diet because season requires it, we tend to eat the same foods. And if we go back to the tolerance comments we were talking about earlier, you know, if you listen to the same piece of music over and over and over again, you get to a point where you don't want to listen to the song anymore. Agree? Yeah? Okay. So the same happens with your diet. If you eat the same things over and over and over again and there's no seasonal shift or break, the body eventually starts to go, I don't want that anymore. I always remember in my teenage years, the first ever edition of the SAS handbook was released. And, you know, for us boys, that was a great thing to be able to read, how to survive in the wild. So this is kind of pre-Bear Grylls and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And one of the topics that was in there that fascinated me was rabbit starvation. And it was based on a theory that if you were marooned on an island and the only thing that you could eat on there was the rabbits, that eventually you would still die. Because following the same food over and over and over again isn't going to give your body the broad spectrum of what it really needs. So you need to vary your diet to support it. And if you eat the same things over and over again, it creates problems for the body. Now, technological developments have also created issues for us. Central heating, double glazing, wall-to-wall carpets. They actually provide environments that make it easier for things like dust mites and moulds to propagate. So you're more likely to be breathing in toxins. And also, because those environments are effectively sealed, part of what you're doing is all of the lovely chemicals that are in your carpets, because most carpets have been treated with pesticides and fungicides, most of the stuff that's in your furniture, which again, if you've got anything that's easy iron or just keeps that nice flat edge, that's been treated with formaldehyde. A lot of our volatile organic compounds in paints, which thankfully are massively on the decrease now because of their toxicity. Some of those things can be outgassing off your furniture for 4 years after you buy them, which means that if you've got a habit of lying on the floor to watch the TV and you've got a brand new carpet there, you're sucking in all those chemicals in through your lungs. Most of that's going to end up in your bloodstream, and that can affect our systems quite significantly. And it's not necessarily that you would have an allergy or a low tolerance to those things, but because of the nature of those things, they can interrupt other chemical pathways, biochemical pathways in your body, and that can give you a proneness to reacting to things, because other systems in your body might not function adequately. Okay, environmental pollutants, those are obvious. We've got more of those around. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that there's about 80,000 chemicals in common usage. We know that well over 5,000 of those are carcinogenic, and we know that over 500 of those are still allowed in your food. So that means there are things that you are allowed to eat by law that they know cause cancer, and you do it anyway. You know, typically, ladies, those of you that like to use plenty of product for your hair and your faces and all the rest of it, it's not unusual for you to be using anything up to 500 known toxic chemicals a day. And because 60% of everything on your skin ends up in your bloodstream, it can mean that you end up causing problems within the biochemistry within the system just because you're not informed about what you're using. So we can also have things like electromagnetic pollution. We know, for instance, that high tensile power lines, as pollen moves through those, the electromagnetic nature of the pollen changes. We know as well that things like diesel fumes denature pollen coatings, and that then when the immune system takes those in, because when they've been altered, it finds it more difficult to recognise them, and therefore it's more difficult to process them because it doesn't know what it is. Definition of an allergy. And also as lifestyle stress has increased, you know, we're almost constantly on the go. We're expected to be and do certain things. That actually puts us into an adaptive stress state, which part of when we go into our fight or flight, got to be here, got to do this, always on the go. I know somebody just like that in the audience over here. And what happens is that our reproductive, our immune and our digestive systems are shut down, because our body's flight or fight mechanism is designed for dealing with lions and earthquakes and stuff like that. So the threat is present, and then when it isn't present, we can relax, it's okay. But these days, we're constantly on the go. I'm late for this, I've got to be here, I've got to do this, got this deadline. And so we go into this adaptive stress state, so our digestion, reproduction and immune systems just don't function at 100% because we are under that state of stress. And when you're getting away from lions and earthquakes, you don't need a reproductive system, unless you think that's the solution to the lion chasing you, but I don't think that's really going to help. So it's really important that we're aware of our levels of stress, and this is one of the reasons why things like yoga, meditation, qigong have all become much more popular in the last sort of 10-20 years, because they teach us to relax. And I know I'm heltering at a pace here when I'm talking, but I've got lots of things that I'm trying to say, and I know that I haven't got very long left. So I've got to keep rolling, but I am just going to take some water. You all right with me so far? Anybody want to ask a quick question while I take a sip?
About your kinesiology practice, which is applied kinesiology. So my
No, it isn't, but yes.
okay. With muscle testing, how do you know that you're not essentially just accessing what maybe your brain thinks you might be allergic to? Like,
We blind test.
okay.
So
So you wouldn't tell me what the sample was, and then you would
not until after. Yeah, sure. So the question there was, with kinesiology, how do we know that the body isn't just reacting to the thought state? So if I say to you, we're going to put a gluten sample on now. Yes, that might cause a reaction, absolutely, because of the belief system. And interestingly or not, surprising amount of the conditions that you might have are because you believe there is a problem. And so you're telling and informing your biochemistry. And because your DNA is listening to you, it's going to respond to what you tell it. So absolutely. So we just blind test. We just don't tell you what it is we're testing until afterwards. Because again, that's part of the objectivity. You know, in the nicest possible way, I don't care what I find in a kinesiology test. Compassionately, I want to be able to help you. But I also don't want to let any beliefs I have about whether or not that thing may or may not be a good or a bad thing for you to cloud the way I test. So I blind test. I just put the substance on. I mean, I know what it is, but you know, I put it on and I test, and you either react to it or you don't. And if you react to it, it's a problem. If you don't, it isn't a problem. It doesn't matter to me, because I'm not the one that has to go away and avoid it. I know what I've got to avoid, and most of the time I do. Occasionally I have a little party and I don't, but that's all of us, isn't it? Was that useful? Okay, thanks. But I'm not an applied kinesiologist. I do several forms, but thank you. Okay, so question from the lady at the back.
Just practicing your standing up technique, very good. My question is there any evidence or your thoughts to suggest that there's an impact on stress from negative facial expressions of people you encounter or just tone of voice?
Yes, absolutely. So this is one of the reasons as well why our modern kind of society, with all its texting and messaging and all the rest of it, while there's a lot of kind of mismatch in communication there, because it's a form of meta-communication. So our body language and our tone of voice, etc., are informing us, they're punctuating what that stream of thought is really about. So, I could jollily say to you, oh, you're an idiot. And it comes across really nice. Or I could go, you're an idiot! And it totally changes what the information is. So it's a punctuation. So definitely there's a response to that. But that is also familial. So it's based on the culture that you were raised in. So there are some body languages and some facial expressions that you will only see causing issues with certain cultures. And you go into a different culture where they don't recognise that, and you pull that face or you use that tone of voice and it will make no difference for them. So it's something that's culturally based as well. Okay. So let me talk to you a little bit about epigenetics as well. Now, with allergy as well, almost any symptom in the body can be created or exacerbated by an allergy, okay? Because the body is going to stick the substance into an incorrect metabolism pathway, so it could end up doing anything for you. But don't limit that. So it could be a brief pain. It could be headache, confusion in thinking, blurred vision. It could be sluggishness. It could be hyperactivity. So there was an American researcher called Theron Randolph who between the late 50s and the early 90s published 1,000 papers on clinical ecology. And he split the world of clinical ecology down the middle. Because the medical side of clinical ecology, and again I understand their reasons for this, say that unless there is an immunoglobulin response in your blood, then it's not an allergy. But that's based on their definition of how they use it. Theron showed in his testing that actually you could demonstrate an allergic reaction and there didn't have to be an immunoglobulin response in the blood. And what he would do at his place in Chicago, he had this great research centre, is he'd strip you naked at the door and he'd fast you on distilled water for anything up to a week. He'd stick you inside a room and then he'd blow stuff into it and you wouldn't know what was there. And he would just observe what you did physically, and he would take a lot of biochemistry results as well. So he developed a scale of -5 to +5 on allergy responses. The minuses were all hypo reactions. So they were sedations, depressions, low energy, that kind of stuff. The hypers were inflammations, hyperactivities, and so on. So we know that there can be these variances without the blood having to show it, which is the vein that I follow with kinesiology. Now with epigenetics, this is about that which is above genetic or kind of triggers our genetics for us. And as I said earlier, we were given this idea in the 90s of genetic determinism that you didn't have a choice. But we know through processes of methylation and acetylation that we can open and close our genes. And it's about why is our body choosing to do that? What is the information that's coming into the cell to tell it what it needs to do? Because the DNA is just not sitting there in every cell going, right, it's 4 o'clock, better send out some of this hormone. He's just about to wake up, make sure that you produce some of this. It's actually following signals from the environment around it. And that includes everything from temperature, light, pressure, threat, everything is breathing in, contacting the skin. There's all sorts of aspects to it. But it's there informing. So our choice of the environments that we're in physically, emotionally, mentally make a massive difference to our health. The environment is informing our DNA constantly and is really important for us to make sure that we're choosing as best we can. So I'm glad you're all here because I'm kind of speaking to the converted. You wouldn't be here unless you had an interest in doing something that was a little bit different. And we know that a lot of our processed packaged food is not working for us. It should be called food-like substance rather than food, really, because it's not all that genuinely food. And it's important as well to differentiate between our endogenous toxicity, the stuff that we create naturally in our bodies, and our exogenous toxicity. Too many words there. the stuff that's coming in from the outside. If we can manage the endogenous properly, the exogenous is less of a problem. But we need to be careful about that because it's still informing the DNA. And our need for adequate nutrition is essential in this because that's what creates all of the phase 1, phase 2 detox pathways within our cells to make sure that we are converting substance A into substance B and that anything harmful is put into something neutral and released from the body in a safe way. Now, if you don't have adequate nutrition, you just can't do that because the parts of the vehicle didn't show up, so you can't drive it out of the showroom. Okay? It's as simple as that. But what we don't recognise often is that when we're under states of stress, that our need for certain nutrients can go up sometimes in the hundreds of % because the body is driving those pathways more and more and more, so we need to feed those pathways. And if we can't, then we can only drive the percentage of them that nutrition is adequate for. Now, with the epigenetic typing that we're doing here at Centre for Integral Health behind us today, we're looking at 3 basic genetic types. A thyroidal dominant, an adrenal dominant.
Can I just ask, Claire McDonald-Lee, her husband's not in here, is he? No? Okay.
Thanks, Rhea. Rhea's an adrenal dominant, you can tell, because she's running around like a headless chicken today. So we've got the thyroid dominance, the adrenal dominance, and the gonadal dominance, which for the ladies is the ovaries, and for the boys is the not ovaries. Okay? So, and each one of these has got particular aspects that are common to them. So we can look at your height, we can look at your genetic morphology, and we can get some general orientating patterns about who you will be as a person from that. But they are generalizations. Okay? So you as an individual, I've got a teacher who talks about the fact that the ultimate minority is the individual. We are all different. So we have to remember that there's going to be stuff that's specific to you that is not part of that generality. But what we're really doing is trying to give you a guiding orientation. Because when you picked up your pristine, expensive car, did anybody tell you whether or not it was petrol, diesel, or hybrid electric? And if you didn't know what kind of base fuel to put into it or how to fuel it, there's a good chance that car isn't going to run very far or for very long. Now, our bodies are much more adaptable than that. They can grind all this stuff around.
Actually, we have been told how to look after that car because the government and the NHS
McDonald, please, to the children's area as a matter of urgency, please. Mr. McDonald.
Each decade, we're getting given a different manual, a different set of instructions on how to look after it.
Sure, but to be fair as well, the work in clinical dietitians is actually a little bit behind on some of the research. And if you'd like to have a discussion about that later, we can do that. So we have our 3 types, each of them needing particular requirements within our bodies, each of them giving us a guiding orientation towards a particular style of living. And I've been working with the epigenetic profiles now for about 5 or 6 years. And when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I developed a little belly. It was quite a nice little belly. I used to love my little belly a little bit. But it didn't matter what I eat, I couldn't get rid of my belly. Didn't matter what I didn't eat, I couldn't get rid of my belly. And I was vegetarian and vegan for 12 years, thinking that might help. It didn't. I didn't drink any alcohol for 7 years, thinking that might help. It didn't. I did copious amounts of sit-ups, thinking that might help, and it didn't. And when I had my epigenetic body typing, that was actually the 3rd time it had come up for me that alpha-solanine, or the nightshade family, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, aubergines, and chili, were an issue. I'd seen it 2 other times, but didn't want to take them out because they were a big part of my diet. As soon as I took them out, my little belly went away. 6 weeks, didn't make any other changes to my diet. I eat like a horse. I love a big portion of food. And my belly just went away. And I've kind of stayed this shape ever since. Now, when I look at the genetic morphology of my typology, and I look at my father, now my father and I are very, very similar in build and shape, and he looks exactly like an unhealthy man who's an adrenal type. And he doesn't want to hear about what he could change to improve his diet, but that's okay. But I changed mine, and I look like the healthy version of our type. So we're quite interesting when you stick us together, because you can take, in the epigenetic work we do, we send you out a guide that shows you your body type in its healthy and unhealthy states. And the picture of the healthy adrenal type and the unhealthy adrenal type kind of look like me and my dad stood next to each other, which is kind of fun. So typically the thyroidal types can have thyroid issues. They can also be prone to other heart issues as well because of the way their bodies recycle homocysteine. The gonadal types can be have quite high fluctuating weight issues. They're prone to certain types of cancers in a different way as well, estrogen dependent cancers, and they can have higher chemical sensitivity. And the adrenal types, my type, we can suffer from water retention, extreme fatigue, allergies and asthma, as well as high blood pressure and some forms of heart disease as well. And these are just patterns that are typically found within these processes. Okay? It doesn't mean that that's how it will be for you as an individual. It's just a guiding orientation. So we give you this orientation so you have a better roadmap of how to look after yourself as a person. And yes, there are lots of different approaches that work for different types of people. And this is one of the reasons why there's blood type diets, there's food combining diets, there's paleo diets, there's vegan diets. And part of this is that the person that is pioneering that work has found that it worked for them. And that's perfect. And it will work for a percentage of the population. And that's good. But everybody has to kind of find their own way. And just following the typical guidance about having a mixed diet of proteins, fats, carbohydrates, making sure that you're having a healthy, balanced diet is not enough. You need to be better informed, to be better educated about what kind of food you can cope with as an individual and how that might affect you. And a lot of you will already be seeing that anyway, because more and more we're seeing people at younger ages developing problems because their bodies are just not coping with what we consider to be food these days. And it's better if we can inform ourselves and choose as best we can for us as individuals. And that is a degree of trial and error. You have to practice it, and you have to be able to observe yourself and see what's happening, because some of the responses might not happen for a day or two after exposure. So understanding yourself is really important, and with the epigenetic information we can help that to happen as well, and again just give you that clarity on that roadmap for you. And I've found this one of the most significant and useful things for overall health, because now I can give you a good idea of how to properly fuel your car, which means that as you travel you can learn more, you can understand more, because you have an understanding of some of the things that weaken you as an individual, and you can avoid those or not. And it's interesting that I've had a few clients over the years who have said to me, I didn't want to cut that out because it's one of my favourite things ever. And you ask them about how the symptoms are going. Well, they haven't changed. Okay, well, can I dare you? Can I dare you to just stop this for 6 weeks and see what happens? And, for some people it's difficult. We can get withdrawal as well when we stop having certain compounds. Caffeine's a good example of that. If you, when you stop having your caffeine, if you're a regular coffee tea drinker, for a couple of days after you can get some headaches and you can feel pretty grumpy and so on. And that's, on the same spectrum as a heroin withdrawal, really. It's just a variance of the level that it's working in your body. So, and sometimes our allergy can be like addiction. So we can really crave the thing that we have an allergy to, because the body doesn't really know what it's doing with it. So we get this mechanism of craving taking place. And again, when we go without it, we feel rotten for a few days. And it's only when we've gone past that period we actually start to improve and feel better. So I think I'm just about coming towards the end of my time here now. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes if you want to ask any other questions, and we can go through those quickly. So yes, lady at the front here.
Just something that people with food intolerance struggle with. You were saying that getting that good, varied, adequate nutrition is so important for your body to do its detoxification and metabolism processes. But when you start having reactions to more and more foods, you get to where you're only eating like 5 things because they're the only 5 things, and it's like this downward spiral where you're not getting enough of what you need, but you can't get enough of what you need because your body then has a unbearable reaction. I'm not sure exactly where the question is, but if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So for anybody that wasn't quite sure about that, the lady was talking about how there can be this spiralling cycle of when you start to take things out of your diet, you find you're reacting to more and more things, and you eventually just end up with the very few things that you can eat. Now, what that tells me is the problem isn't the food. So there's something else that's going on within the biochemistry of the body that is making it reactive. And my investigation as a kinesiologist would be, well, what is it that's creating that reaction? Is there some kind of chemical or metal toxicity that's affecting pathways, inhibiting, blocking things? Is there some kind of infection, either from parasites, bacteria, fungus, something like that? There could be various reasons why that's taking place. And so my investigation would be to look at what is it that's actually making you sensitive as a generalized condition, nutrition. And then often what we find is that as that is dealt with, then you can have a much broader diet because your body's not quite so hypersensitive. Okay. Any others?
Could it be that most of the food is probably glyphosate, and whatever you take
Yeah.
can affect you? Regardless what the food is, it could be the chemical that is spread.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's a very common problem. I mean, I don't know how many of you know, but if your wheat is non-organic, then it will have been harvested using Roundup, using glyphosate. So this is a herbicide that's a desiccant, so it basically kills things off by drying them. And so years and years and years ago, farmers were able to, check the dryness of their wheat, and they had to be very careful about the time scale of when they went and harvest it in case it got damp and then it got mouldy and then it got ruined. But these days, you can just go and spray it with Roundup a week before you want it, and it will dry out. And then you can just go and harvest it, and off you go. Now, a study 2 years ago in Germany at point of sale, looking at German beer, was testing German beer off the taps for glyphosate, and they found it in 90% of the beer. So it goes all the way through the brewing process, all the way through the filtering process, and ends right up there. So, and there's definitely the likelihood of persistence of pesticides because a lot of them are now systemic. Potatoes, for instance, rather than having to chop your potato tops and clear them away, easier to just spray them with Roundup because then they die and then you can just go and pick your potatoes up nice and easy. But unfortunately, Roundup is a systemic herbicide, so it just goes down into the tuber, into the potato, and you'll have residues of it in what you eat. So again, unless you're on a good organic diet, that's always a possibility that there is that commonality. But that's also coming under the idea of is the toxicity that's coming in. Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Lady at the end here.
If you have allergy or intolerance to something, if you introduced it into your diet and ate it quite consistently, do you think you could build up a tolerance to it and be able to handle it?
If it's an allergy, no, because any amount of it's going to cause a reaction in your body. With a low tolerance, depending on what the general health in your life is, you can also improve your tolerance and you may be able to cope with more of a substance. But putting it in as a way of building the tolerance up is unlikely to work. It's kind of like the friend that you don't like constantly calling you up and going, when are we meeting? When are we meeting? When are we meeting? When are we meeting? And all you want to do is shoot them in the head. Okay, so better off to stay away from it and have it on a not too much, not too often basis, because, and again, do it only when you're well, because your tolerance is more likely to be able to cope with that. And that's if it's low tolerance as opposed to allergy.
So that's what I think. My partner thinks I should reintroduce gluten as a way to build up my tolerance. But
Yeah, no, unfortunately that doesn't typically work. Sorry, Legina, you were going to... Uh-huh.
So how do we know? I'd like to come to you for an allergy test.
Uh-huh.
How do you decide which one's best?
We have a conversation. So most of the time it's about talking to people and understanding what it is they're trying to achieve and kind of directing it through there. Yeah, okay. So that was a question about how do you know what to pick. All right, so I think do you want me to kick off the stage
There's
now?
another question, by all means, Ben.
Yeah.
We're coming to the end of the time.
Sure.
But if there are any more questions, just take them.
Lady at the back. Sorry, could you just speak up a little bit, please?
An interesting talk that's given us a vast amount of information. I've tried to retain which bits are relevant to me. Can you succinctly just give us 2 or maybe 3 tips of what we can do today or tomorrow that will just help us be more aware of what we're doing?
No problem. So that was a request for just 2 or 3 pieces of information that are really helpful. The first is inform yourselves. Okay? Read, understand where your food is coming from and how it's produced. So an interesting example, you guys know that a lot of your food comes from glass houses, from greenhouses, right? So I got to drive along southern Spain 2 years ago, and for 100 kilometres to watch the greenhouses that run almost from the sea to almost 3 kilometres inland as a constant block. We have no idea how much of our food is produced in conditions that is adverse to natural and normal. So that would be the first thing, get informed. The second would be to eat clean. So by that, I'm talking about organic. So here, you're helping to eat as much seasonal as possible, as much local as possible, and you're avoiding as many of the likely toxins or things that can create disruption in the body as possible. So that would be number 2, would be to eat clean. And the third is listen to your body. Very rarely on anything other than an emotional level will it ever need chocolate cake. Okay. Very rarely on anything other than an emotional level will it need alcohol. Okay. Very rarely on anything other than an emotional level will it need processed sugars and grains and dairy. You've got to remember, we're the only creature on the planet that has dairy beyond our weaning age, and we're the only creature on the planet that has the dairy of another creature. Okay? There's something to be learned in that if you use a little bit of logic. So that would be my things really, is kind of think about what really you need, stay away from food-like substances, inform yourself, and eat as much organic as you can. How was that for you?
Thank you. On your behalf, ladies and gentlemen, big thanks to Ben. That was fantastic. Thank you very much.